Gentlemen, come on in and have a seat. We're pressed for time. Take your hats off. Arson, take your hat off. Especially with the Steeler hat. That's a no-no. Losing at home to Jacksonville. Wow. Okay, let's get going. If we've got some announcements we can do in the dining hall, we've got. Oh, Mr. Smythe has one, and then we're going to go straight to Mr. Baker.
I just want to say it's really nice to see everybody today. My alarm went off at 4:33 this morning. It's been pretty lonely since then, so it's really nice to have everybody back.
If I've learned anything from my years of watching professional wrestling, it's always good to make your entrance after the heel. So thank you, Mr. Smythe. A heel's the bad guy. The heel's the bad guy. All right. So I want to thank everybody for your attention yesterday. I know that was a lot of dense information, and again, I was speaking very broadly about over 100 years of history. So today I'm going to get to part 2 of my presentation titled "That's Not Fair, but It's Not You, It's Them," and this is more of a philosophical attempt to talk about education, the idea of contentment, and the journey in general. But there were 2 things I didn't quite get through yesterday. We talked a bit about racial diversity, and we looked at that interesting New York Times data on diversity over time at campuses. But of course, diversity doesn't end at race. And so the other important thing that happened in higher ed was coeducation, right? So the first time a significant number of women were enrolled in the undergraduate college at places like Yale and Princeton was 1969. Before that, there were some, but not many, and mostly in the graduate program. So that happened in 1969. But even then, it was at a fixed ratio. So for example, at Yale, or I'm sorry, this is at Princeton, they were going to admit some women, but they had to admit 4 men for every 1 woman. So it was still, there was a quota in place set at 25%. So what changed all that? What changed that was really an amendment to an educational bill in 1972. The amendment was Title IX, which I'm sure you've heard of. Usually you hear about Title IX as it relates to sports, but certainly understand that in essence, gave many schools permission to do what they wanted to do anyway, which was create a campus that looked more in microcosm like the larger society, right? So about 50-50 in terms of men and women. And so Title IX accomplished that in the early 1970s in some way. But keep in mind that today there remains a gender gap in higher education, and in fact it's because women are outperforming men as it relates to scholastics, right? So campuses are now nearly 60% female. Women are earning 170,000 more bachelor's degrees every year than men. So consider this. To make a class that's 50-50, men, women, which most schools are trying to do, they're actually practicing affirmative action on the behalf of the boys in this room. The other area of diversity is international, right? So many schools are taking applications and accepting students from different countries in the world. So in 2002, for example, Yale's freshman class had 10% international students, and that's about where most selective colleges still are today. Some are a little bit higher, some are a little bit lower. And then also consider that it wasn't just the student body, right, that schools were attempting to diversify. They were also diversifying their faculty as well as their admission offices. So admission offices got bigger, they got younger, and they got more diverse over time as well. Okay, lastly, and this is something that I could spend way more time on. And this is the idea that many, many schools, although many will feign that they don't care at all about rankings, trust that people are hired and fired every year in admission offices based on where their school is ranked, whether they're climbing in the rankings or dropping in the rankings. And so who do we have to thank for the rankings of colleges? We have to thank U.S. News and World Report. So in 1983, that was the first year they issued their America's Best Colleges report, and unfortunately we haven't turned back from that. You also have the advent of the internet, right? And so the Common Application is now a pretty easy to fill out form that hundreds of colleges take. So if the ease of applying to more than one school is a part of the application process, guess what? Application numbers have soared at colleges, right? So colleges have seen literally in the last 20 to 30 years, tens of thousands of more applications. And so they're more selective, largely because they're just getting more applications. So they care a lot about selectivity because that's one of the markers that U.S. News and World Report is looking to when they're trying to create their best colleges list. The other thing they're looking at is this thing called yield. Okay, so yield is, if I'm a school, I have to admit 100 students to get 50. The 50 I get, I'm yielding, right? That's what yield is, right? So in that case, I would have a 50% yield rate, which is not bad, but certainly not good, right? So what have schools done to try to actually manipulate, not just the selectivity, we could talk about that for a long time too, but the yield rates? Well, they've created different ways for you to apply. That largely is beneficial to the institution, but not beneficial in most cases to the individual applicant. You know these by acronym now, right? ED, EA, ED2, right? And so early decision is a way that you can apply to a school so that when you apply, you sign a little contract, your parents sign a little contract, we, the college counseling office, signs a contract that says, if you admit me, I'm coming. Well, that's very advantageous for a school that cares about yield, right? Because that's a one-to-one yield tool for them. So who are the trendsetters in this? Yale, Princeton, and Harvard, right? So consider that Yale was dropping a bit in the rankings, and they were a little worried, and this was in the 1990s. So they said, early decision's the way to go, and they went with early decision. And guess what? Within 6 or 7 years, they were the top-ranked school in the country. And so they achieved that largely. I mean, there are other things, right? But ED was a big factor in that. And guess what? Princeton was worried about slipping, so what did they do? They created ED too, right? And so they climbed in the rankings, and by 2001, they replaced Yale as the top-ranked school in the country. So these early application types, or the proliferation of these early application types, I think are an indication of how obsessed certain schools are with the rankings. All right, now to the philosophy. So I think it's a good idea to start with Gilman's mission. And so I'll just read it out loud if that's okay. Gilman School is a diverse community dedicated to educating boys in mind, body, and spirit through particular emphasis on academic excellence, athletic participation, and aesthetic appreciation. Gilman seeks to produce men of character and integrity who have the skills and ability to make a positive contribution to the communities in which they live and work. The reason I wanted to start here philosophically is because it's our philosophy, right? It's the school's philosophy. And I also want to note that the philosophy is abstract. It's an ideal, right? Plato might call this a version of the forms, right? Something that is abstract, that we can kind of conceptualize and see an example, but could never quite achieve, right? The issue with college admission is that we often see folks setting very concrete goals for themselves, right? And so in many cases, a lot of this anxiety relates to the fact that families and students are setting up concrete objective goals for themselves, like, I want to go to Denison, right? And then if that doesn't happen, they feel very, very disappointed, right? I guess part of this talk today is to encourage you to do what Gilman's mission, right, is doing, and that is set for yourself abstract, ideal goals for yourself. Okay? And also trust this, that 100% of Gilman students go to four-year colleges. You're in a very, very good place. Also, of that 100%, 81% attend most competitive or highly competitive colleges. Being the byproduct of a public school, I can tell you that that does not happen elsewhere, right? So trust that you're in a very good place. And I would say, what does an abstract goal look like for you? Well, it looks like what Mr. Smythe says. It looks to strive to become the best version of yourself on any given day or in any given year. It looks like I want to make a difference in the lives of people close to me or farther away from me. It looks like striving to uphold the Gilman Five, which again are abstract ideals and concepts and not concretely tangible. So don't be anxious. Trust and be confident that you're in a place with this kind of a mission that is going to do well by you and that you're going to do well by it. All right, so I read a book a couple years ago called Excellent Sheep. It was both provocative and interesting, by William Dershowitz, who himself was a professor at one of these Ivy League schools, and the subtitle is The Miseducation of the American Elite and the Way to a Meaningful Life. So he's being philosophical, but he's also going to point out what he sees to be problems within selective higher education. So I'm stealing all of this from him, and I'm sorry to the junior class, I started the year off with having you guys stand up and read these aloud, but I'm just going to repeat them for the larger school. So what is an education and what is it for? I love this idea that it's a self-inflicted wound, and I'm not going to analyze or explain that for you. I hope you think about it. But an education teaches you how to think, how to be skeptical, to doubt and question what you think you know. It shows you how to reach your own conclusions and demonstrates the value of being proven wrong. It helps you clarify your moral, intellectual, aesthetic, and emotional whole self. It coaches you on how to read and write well. It lets you discover the limits and limitlessness of your own creative being. It forces you into unfamiliar and uncomfortable worlds of ideas, places, and people. It grants you the space to become a mature citizen, to discover how to live more alertly, responsibly, freely, and fully. It permits you to be a more interesting person through the process of discovery, introspection, and self-examination. It's also an unending pilgrimage that leaves you with more questions than answers, and it offers the gift and opportunity for change and becoming something more. So there were, I think, a year or maybe a year and a half where I was like waking up every day. This is going to sound weird. I was waking up every day and reading a verse from the Tao Te Ching and thinking about it, and then like walking out the door, right, as if somehow I had like figured it out, or this was going to help me figure it out. So if you have never read the Tao Te Ching, it's a 5th century BCE book of collected wisdom by allegedly Lao Tzu. But I think some of the verses that I'm going to share with you today are going to help you approach not just the college application process, but hopefully a lot of things, right? Like including the end of the semester projects, right, in your humanities classes that you're all freaking out about probably right now. Okay, so first, discover and believe in yourself. The Tao Te Ching says, because the master believes in herself, she doesn't try to convince others. Because she is content with herself, she doesn't need others' approval. Because she accepts herself, the whole world accepts her. So if you start with an implicit trust in yourself, you're already on the right path. Be patient. The Tao Te Ching says, do you have the patience to wait till the mud settles and the water is clear? So much, except for maybe a handful of seniors, right? So much is murky about your future, right? And the challenge is, can you be patient enough to let your future clarify itself for you? Of course, you have agency within that to do things that are meaningful, but be patient. And also be humble. The master sees that things as they are without trying to control them. Not knowing is true knowledge. Presuming to know is a disease. Embrace uncertainty. A good traveler has no fixed plans and is not intent upon arriving. To me, traffic is a good example here. I was telling Ms. Ross the other day that traffic is the perfect place for me to practice uncertainty and being in the moment, right? Like, I'm trying to get somewhere, and this traffic is preventing me from getting there. And so in those kinds of moments, when you don't know when or how you're going to get somewhere, try to pause, embrace the moment, and embrace uncertainty. And this is something that I think everybody needs to do more. And this is ultimately Dershowitz's argument in Excellent Sheep, is that essentially we're creating a crop of really good students who are afraid to fail. Embrace failure, right? And actually put yourself in positions to fail. So failure is an opportunity. If you blame someone else, there's no end to the blame. Listen, this is my favorite slide. Listen, but be discerning. So the caveat here is, as you approach the college admission process, a lot of people are going to want to talk to you about it. And a lot of people are going to give you advice, right? So listen to that advice, but be discerning. And so the Tao Te Ching says, those who know don't talk. Those who talk don't know. A lot of times in my office when I'm meeting with students and families, my answers to questions are like, it depends, maybe, right? I don't pretend to know the answers in a lot of cases. I mean, some cases I know when the SAT is going to be held, right? I can give you a definitive response to that. But with a lot of these questions, my answers are always like, it depends or maybe, right? And so you might run into some people that will offer you very concrete or kind of linear responses to those answers that make you feel good, like if I do this, this, and this, this will happen. I would suggest that you be discerning when people offer you that kind of advice. Because when the Tao Te Ching says, when they think that they know the answers, people are difficult to guide. And when they know that they don't know, people can find their own way. Don't compare or compete. When you're content to be simply yourself and don't compare and compete, everybody will respect you. If you care about people's approval, you will be their prisoner. And this is a difficult thing to say to a bunch of students who have parents. I care still very much about my parents' approval, but try to kind of compartmentalize some of this, I guess, in terms of how you compare or compete. Be open-minded, moldable, and adaptable. Whoever is stiff and inflexible is a discipline of death. That's dramatic. Whoever is soft and yielding is a disciple of life. The hard and stiff will be broken. The soft and supple will prevail. And I'll leave you with this. Seek contentment. And notice I don't say like happiness or lots of money. Last night I was up at 3 in the morning with my 7-month-old son. I was not happy about it, but I can tell you that I was very content and I felt very full at that moment, right? So don't misconstrue happiness and contentment, and I would advise that you seek contentment and not happiness. So what is contentment? Fame or integrity, which is more important? Money or happiness, which is more valuable? Success or failure, which is more destructive? If you look to others for fulfillment, you will never truly be fulfilled. If your happiness depends on money, you will never be happy with yourself. Be content with what you have. Rejoice in the way things are. When you realize there is nothing lacking, the whole world belongs to you. Thanks.